Goodyear's Bar, California was established in 1851 as Slaughterer's Bar. It was changed to Goodyear's to honor the gold miners who prospected the area there. It's a tiny location covering only 2.1 square miles. It has a tiny population to match, coming in at only 68 people in 2010. I wasn't able to find the population in 1945, but this should give you an idea about how rural the area is. The North Yuba River flows to the north of Goodyear's Bar, and there are numerous creeks that fork off from the main river throughout the area. I will also note that the population was likely higher back then, as this was a gold mining town, but is currently just a historic place. Richard Dickie Tom Suden was born to Joseph and Sally in San Francisco. The family owned a property of Goodyear's Bar in the foothills of the Sierra in California. Part of their ownership in this area was that of a gold mine, which was technically owned by Joseph's father, but Joseph worked as a superintendent there and reaped many of the benefits of having a literal gold mine in the family. Many of these benefits were passed down to Dickie, although he was only 3 years old at the time. He had a sheepdog named Heidi that he was very close to, and he never really wanted for much. On Thursday, the 1st of November, 1945, Sally was with Dickie in their cabin in Goodyear's Bar. She allowed Dickie to play with his dog, Heidi, in the front yard at 9 a.m. while she did something else inside the house. Half an hour later, at 9:30 a.m., Sally checked on Dickie, only to discover that both he and Heidi were missing. Sally immediately assumed that Dickie and Heidi had wandered off down to the highway. When she got there, she didn't find them. But she did manage to flag down a passing car. The owner of that car, a man named Dr. Cahoon, searched for Dickie while Sally called the sheriff. He managed to locate Heidi about 150 feet up the trail from the home, but Dickie was still nowhere to be found. The sheriff arrived after this, and the official search began. The sheriff went with Dr. Cahoon and Sally up the trail where Heidi had been found. Going about 50 feet past where the dog had been, they located a red and blue mitten that was identified as belonging to Dickie. It was sitting in a bush with no visible footprints of any kind around it, almost as if it had been placed there, according to reports. While Heidi had been trained not to leave Dickie's side, it was not regarded as particularly strange that they were separated because of the terrain. Heidi was a house dog and not accustomed to traveling through the rough, hilly terrain. According to those that knew Dickie, on the other hand, he was strong and big for his age, capable of outlasting even his mother in the hills of Goodyear's Bar. On the 2nd, Heidi was taken back to the area where she was found, but she refused to go any further up the trail. It was suggested at this time that a mountain lion may have taken Dickie, as they are known to be in this area. On the 3rd or 4th of November, FBI agents from the surrounding areas had begun to show up and keep tabs on the case, although their involvement was unofficial at this time. They just told the press no comment when they were asked about the case. The head of the FBI branch of San Francisco, John Vincent, identified himself but expressed that the FBI were just there to observe unofficially. It was reported on the 4th of November that the FBI had come on scene and that they announced they were already working on the case, although they could not comment on any evidence that there was a kidnapping. With regards to the kidnapping angle, the parents' spokesperson told the press that they did not believe that Dickie was lost and that they were waiting for a ransom letter. At this point, there were 800 searchers and they had gone over 16 square miles surrounding the Goodyear's Bar. Some were even probing into the Yuba River with hooked poles. Going against the idea of kidnapping, however, were the presence of footprints that matched the size and type of shoe that Dickie was wearing when he went missing. One partial print was found about half a mile from the Tom Suden home, with another cluster being found about a mile away from his home. John Black, a dog trainer, showed up from Utah bringing his 2 Russian shepherds and used them to try and follow the scent for Dickie. As of November 5th, they were having trouble because so much of the area had become disturbed and contaminated from the high volume of searchers. They were able to briefly pick up the scent initially, but lost it. When they returned a second time to pick up the trail again, the dogs were unable to do so. Now, why would this be? Why would these famous dogs be unable to find Dickie when they had been previously so successful? After all, these dogs are practically celebrities, with John Black claiming that his dogs could find people as late as 3 years after they had disappeared. To me, this claim seems utterly outlandish if we consider his dogs to be search and rescue. For example, we have another dog handler, Mr. Thompson, who had 2 Dobermans that were brought by Army plane and Highway Patrol automobiles from Sunnyvale, and he said to his knowledge no dog has been able to pick up the scent later than 75 hours after a disappearance. Since nearly 100 hours have passed since Dickie disappeared at this point, the hope of discovering his trail would be slight, unless he survived the night on Thursday as well as all the way through Friday. The only use for dogs at this point was to crisscross the search area in hopes that Dickie was alive and mobile, leaving a fresh scent trail for them to follow. Dog handler also went on to state that all the hundreds of people trampling the area may have destroyed the scent trail in combination with the dampness of the area. So going back to John Black's claims, an article posted in the Missing Animal Response Network cautions against believing anyone saying that their dogs can track trails that are months old, saying that the longest that they would be comfortable estimating a trail to stay intact would be 2 weeks. A quick Google search seems to line up with this information, saying that the oldest documented case of a successful track was 13 days old. Given all this information, I'm inclined to believe that Black's dogs were actually cadaver dogs, and they were just misreported as search and rescue dogs. The first mention of significant bad weather in the area is reported on the 6th of November, which states that the efforts were negatively affected on the night of the 5th going into the 6th. However, the search didn't stop just for the weather, as hundreds were still continuing to search, perhaps spurred on by the slim hope that Dickie was hard enough to live for a few days in the woods, given that he was heavily clothed at the time of his disappearance. It was around this time that Dickie's family dropped the kidnapping theory, and his mother is quoted as saying that the kidnapping theory is all wrong. Nobody could drive up this narrow road from the highway to the house without attracting attention. There was immediately the follow-up question, isn't the terrain so rough and steep that a small child could not have traveled alone? She answered the question saying, well, certainly not. Dickie is a husky, strong boy. He could scramble up slopes that would tax my strength. He used his hands as well as his feet when climbing, and he could have gone a long way. Others involved in the search, however, would continue to promote the kidnapping theory, so it would be incorrect to say that it was dropped by everyone. In fact, the kidnapping theory was bolstered by numerous sightings of Dickie all across the nation. There was a sighting of him in El Paso, but his parents refuted this as the clothing and other details did not match up with him. There was a waiter working in a Mexican restaurant in Oakland that reported seeing Dickie with a couple, but nothing seemed to come from that sighting either. The theory picked up steam as time went on, with people calling the police, saying that they had Dickie but would chop off his limbs unless money was given to them. Others said that they had overheard sailors or other outsiders talking about how they had snatched the boy from the area. Reports from various restaurant staff came in reporting children that looked like Dickie, but all of these reports were investigated and produced no leads. One story was lent a little bit more credence than others, and it was a report that a car had been seen speeding towards the Suden home by a garage operator. The car had Washington plates that were later found to be stolen. About 30 minutes later, the car was seen speeding back in the opposite direction. This time, they were able to see inside the car. The occupants were said to be a man, a woman, and a child wrapped in a blanket. I didn't see any follow-up on this, but I thought it was worth reporting. Finally, on the 7th of November, less than a week after he went missing, the search for Dickie Tom Suden was called off by Joseph, his father. There aren't any significant developments until the 15th of November, with the days between only containing more supposed sightings that were later deemed to be inauthentic. However, on the 15th, the FBI announced they would look into the case to determine whether any possible federal violations are concerned in the case. That is, they didn't want to declare it as for sure being a kidnapping. They were trying to determine if there was a case at all. They stayed in the area investigating until they were satisfied that federal laws had not been violated. As kidnapping was now the only way his son was still alive, Joseph made several pleas in newspapers, asking for kidnappers to provide proof that his son was alive and well, and that if that was done, he would cooperate with them. He promised to leave law enforcement out of it and had an address printed in the newspapers for the express purpose of facilitating contact with any kidnappers. In the end, the district attorney said that there was no evidence whatsoever of kidnapping. It was reported that the only reason why the family believed that Dickie had been kidnapped was that he was never found. There are some legitimate oddities that I want to discuss. Mrs. Richard Tom Suden, Dickie's grandmother, reported that in 1940, 5 years before Dickie had disappeared, a man claiming to represent the FBI contacted her to inform her that there was an investigation into an ongoing plot to kidnap her grandson Anthony. Sometime later, she was contacted by the man again, saying that there was now nothing to worry about. She never told anybody about this since it was resolved and she didn't want to worry anyone. But it's odd that this happened at all. I don't think it's standard practice for the FBI to release information to the relatives of potential victims in this manner. It might make intuitive sense that the missing person, especially a toddler, would go downhill rather than up a steep trail. It's this particular claim that appears in Missing 411, but I want to note that this is not the case. Let's look at a book called Lost Person Behavior by Robert Coaster. On page 130, we see the statistics for missing persons between the ages of 1 and 3. In the third table, we see that, in a temperate climate, children have a 33% incidence of going uphill, 36% of going downhill, and 31% of being at the same elevation as where they disappeared from. So while it's technically true that, statistically speaking, they're slightly more likely to go downhill, I would argue that the likelihood of going uphill, downhill, or remaining at the same elevation is roughly the same. At the end of the day, this event is not really a mystery, but rather a long past tragedy. A story of what happens when you trust a dog to watch over your 3-year-old son for half an hour in the woods. I'd like to just take a moment to thank my patrons over at patreon.com for their support that makes videos like this possible. Thank you so much. Those of the public recognition tier are on screen now. And of course, thank you for watching. Until next time, take care.